Welcome to our ASQ section 1106 March 16th meeting. I know we've got people from all over the place have joined us from different sections and many guests as well. So welcome. We're going to have our first talk today on calculating rate of return by Doug Wood. And I'll just turn it right over to Doug and let him get started.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a topic that's it's probably pretty much guaranteed to put you to sleep. You know, a lot of people just sort of cringe at the thought of talking about calculating stuff. You know, it's like, nah, that's no fun. You know, can't you do something fun? Well, this topic underlies so many things that we run across today. And as managers, so many things that we're supposed to do. So we're going to talk today about, what is rate of return and why would you even use it? We're going to cover some of the core concepts behind it. We're going to do a calculation as an example, and then we're going to give you some special considerations that go with this. Okay. So let's define it. Let's know why we do it. So rate of return is an interest rate that's paid on an unrecovered balance of an investment so that the final payment brings the balance to exactly zero. Now, we know about borrowing money, right? You borrow the money and there's an interest rate on it and you pay it back and eventually you pay off the principal and interest. But what you're trying to do is with a rate of return is to say, okay, I don't have an interest rate. What I have is a string of money coming back and some money I'm spending in the beginning and maybe some salvage value I get in the end of an investment. So what is the interest rate that covers that entire project? If you come up with these numbers, this rate of return, you can then compare different investment options. And it even works when you don't have a nice level set of payments. We'll see what that looks like, okay? Because not all investments come as a lump sum in the beginning and then a gradual return, equal amounts year over year, okay, or month over month. That's not always how it works. So here we have an example, okay? We've got a 3-year job to be able to, you're going to run a home office, let's say, and you're going to borrow money and you're going to go out and buy a laptop and you're going to buy office furniture and you're going to use it for a while, but then you're going to retire. Okay. And you won't need the office furniture. You'll basically just, scrap it. We're going to assume that what you bought has no salvage value at the end of the 3 years. That makes it a little simpler to follow here. And so in year 0, initially, there's no unrecovered balance. Okay. But at year 1, that's that $9,000 you borrowed. It has not been recovered. Okay. And there's a certain amount of interest. Okay. That you would have to pay on that 5% interest. Okay. And then there's a cash flow. You're going to make money back. So see, year 0, you take 9,000. That's what you're spending. That's a negative. And then each of the next 3 years, you're actually earning money, 3305 each year. And that number is selected because it balances. Okay. But the first year you've recovered 2855 of your 9,000. Well, that would be 3305 minus 450. Okay. And you look over there on the right and you can say, at the end of the year, my unrecovered balance, we'll see 9,000 in year 0 because you haven't gotten any money back. After you bring that 2855 back, you now have 6145 unrecovered. Well, the 6145 goes over on the far right-hand column under beginning unrecovered balance. There's $307 of interest. And then 3305 again is what you made that year. And so now it's 2998 amount recovered. And you can see here that at the end of 3 years, you have actually recovered, the full 9,000. So 3305 over 3 years equals 9,000 plus the 914 of interest. Everybody follow that now? Kind of see how that looks? This is looking at it from the standpoint of, the bank looks at their unrecovered balance. That's what's important to them. So looking at this, how did that prior table come up with 3305? Where did that number come from? Well, we kind of got to talk about what we call the compound interest factor tables. These are tables that were prepared years ago, before we had computers, and accountants would use these things to determine. So, what would the interest factor be? Typically, each table has a percentage on it, and it's full of values in columns. One of the columns will be marked as A, and then each row in that column is number of time periods, okay? And so you would look into that table and you'd say, I want to find the annual amount, the A, given that I have $9,000 at present, and I want to see what that equals with 3 years at 5%. So that table brings back a factor, a compound interest factor of 0.36721. That's what's in the table. And you would multiply that by the 9,000, your present amount, and it would give you an annual amount of 3305. The A is called the uniform series payments. Accountants have their own language. Okay, and so that's a uniform series called A, or annual, right? So you can see here that 3305 is the annual cash needed to match $9,000 present value over 3 time periods if your interest rate is 5%. Is that clear as mud? That's where the 3305 came from. There's many such tables, okay? They have tables for single amounts and uniform series, and they even have them for gradients. In other words, each year it increases by an amount. Or maybe there's a geometric gradient. Each year it increases by a multiplied amount, okay? So the factor in the middle is how you write this how you write it on in a paper, right? So FP, F is future, P is present. We just used the uniform series A/P. Now, over on the right-hand side, there's some accounting words, okay? Like I said, those accountants have their own words. Who knows where they came out of the Middle Ages somewhere. The A/P uniform series is called capital recovery. But you can see all of these are pretty simple mathematical tables. If you have you want to find an annual amount, you have a present amount, that is $9,000 you borrowed, and you want to find the annual amount that equals that, then A/P is what you use. If you have an amount way out in the future and you want to find the annual amount, that's going to be A over F. Okay? It's going to give you the annual amount, the A, given an F or a future value. and they call that a sinking fund. Maybe you've heard those terms. Okay. But all of them relate back to these tables. So F means a future amount. P means a present value, that is today. A is an annual fixed amount each year. The gradients change in a predictable way each year. The N represents the number of time periods, and the I represents the interest for the time period. What's interesting about that is you can use these same tables for months, count your N as a month, but your interest rate must be monthly interest. You could use N as days, but your I must be daily interest. As long as it's all on the same, on the same lockstep, then the tables have exactly the same values in them. So let's take a look at a more representative type of problem doing this. So what do you need to know to use such tables? Well, you have an investment amount and an interest rate. That's what we've been doing. But what if you know the investment and you know the cash flow, but you don't know what interest rate the project's going to give you? Okay, so we can use the tables and we can try out various interest rate values one page after the other until we find where the results kind of zero, or in other words, where the present value of the various cash flows comes out to be zero. In this way, we know we're considering the time value of money. That's what we're doing here. Another way to think about that is, the bird in the hand is worth two in the future. Okay. Money you get in the future is worth less than money you have now. We all kind of know that, right? That's why you would ask someone to pay you interest if you lent them money. So generally, the initial investment. We're going to spend $100,000 to do this project. You know that. You've figured that out. You've added up all the expenses you're going to have to go into that. So these various concepts. Initial investment. You know what that is. The periodic cash flows. Okay, so you're going to have to estimate what you think each annual or period cash flow is going to be. How much money is this going to help you out with? How much are you going to save year after year? In some cases, there's an ending cash flow. In other words, when you get to the end of the life of a piece of equipment, it has some salvage value. You can sell it for something. And then there's another thing we call the minimum attractive rate of return, MARR. Well, what the heck is that? Well, the minimum attractive rate of return is also called a hurdle rate. It's the amount that interest value has to be judged as an acceptable investment. And this varies from company to company and from time to time. It can be driven upward if you can put your money in the bank and get a lot of interest on it. Because it's going to be higher than what you will gain by putting your money in the bank. We know that an investment in a business had better return more money than a bank account. Otherwise, you just put your money in the bank. Now, we haven't been blessed with high interest rates for a long time. And so, it's been easy to justify expenditures instead of just leaving the money in the bank. But you might have multiple options. You can spend money a lot of different ways. So which one is the better one? Okay, so that is another way this is used. So to begin with, we need to understand what our money looks like. Okay, we need to look at a timeline. So we have this timeline of 10 years, and we just draw it out horizontally. And The arrow going down means money leaving. Arrows going up means money coming in. And so you have a present value. This is the P that we're going to use. This is the investment we're going to make. And it's negative because we're spending it. Now, each year, we expect our investment to return us some money. We expect that there'll be a certain amount of money coming back in. Again, these lines are we don't have a vertical axis on this, but it would vary on the project. You're getting some money back every year, and this is going to be set against the present value using the PA conversion. We just talked about the PA conversion, and there'll be a different conversion for each year, because it's a different distance from year zero. All right. And we have a future value. See it over there? So we can salvage the equipment and we're going to get a chunk of money back for it. And of course, that has to be brought back to year zero also. All right. We got a question there in chat. Okay. So
me sending out notes, sorry.
No problem. So this minimum attractive rate of return, okay, it's a reasonable rate of return established for evaluation selection of alternative projects. So a viable project must at least meet the minimum attractive rate of return. Sometimes this is called a hurdle rate. Sometimes it's called a cutoff rate or a benchmark rate. But it's a number that you've got to get. Your interest rate of this cash flow has to be equal to that or better. So here's an example, okay? What we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at an application of a green manufacturing technique. Oh, it's also lean, by the way. And if we couple that to this value stream mapping techniques, you know what value stream mapping is? It's one of those lean techniques. And by investing in this, we can make large financial differences over future years. And we're also putting greater emphasis on customer quality factors. So the manufacturer at Monarch Paint, the quality manager there has recommended to management that by investing $200,000 this year, this investment will use some new techniques and reduce the amount of wastewater and packaging materials, and also reduce shipping errors in the consumer paint manufacturing. So their estimated savings from all of these benefits is $15,000 a year for each of the next 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, they will have managed to save $300,000 in facility and equipment upgrade cost. In other words, they won't have to do this upgrade. That is, it's like a salvage value you're going to get out of this thing. Okay. So here's our chart with numbers on it. Now, you realize that this particular one is set up at $15,000 a year even. Okay. You know, it might not always look like that. If each year had a different amount, what you'd have to do is you'd have to bring each separate amount back to the present value using future to present. Here's an example. If year 5, if it wasn't 15,000, but instead was 25,000 for some reason because of that year, what you'd want to do is you want to do years 1, 2, 3, 4 through 10 at 15 and use a PA conversion for $15,000. And then you take an additional 10,000 in year 5 using the PF conversion for just that $10,000 and bring that back to present value. So you can see how many different ways you can draw this out. And and use just a couple of calculations to create what you think is the present value. Well, what's interesting, what do we think this rate of return is going to be? So again, you total up the arrows for a cash flow column. You set up a column. This is how you'd use a spreadsheet to do this. You set up a column with interest rates, and you're kind of bracketing what you might see. It might change, and that makes a present worth column. And then you use the Excel formula, NPV, what? Net present value. And the formula looks like this. Interest rate is I, comma. The cash flows in years 1 to 10. That's the locked range where you put in your numbers, plus the year 0 cash flow. And then you calculate the net present value using these cash flows. A line graph against varying interest rates will show you where you get a 0. So you see, this is what we've got. We've got a spreadsheet here where 10 years, there's our $200,000 investment. It's negative. We have our cash flow of $15,000 each year. We have an avoidance, in other words, a return of $300,000 at the end. And then we add them all up to create cash flows. Year 0 is a negative 200. Year 1 is positive 15. And so that column, cash flows, that's the column we're going to apply to the NPV formula. By the way, it's easy to make a chart in Excel to kind of demonstrate this, just like we were looking at a minute ago. If you had a highly complex cash flow, this could help you illustrate what is driving the benefit, okay? Here we have trial interest rates, okay? You see we've got our cash flow table, just duplicated from the last slide. And we have a trial interest rate, or percent, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just a bunch of number, what we think is going to bracket this whole thing. And then the PW value, okay, that is coming from the formula in Excel, okay, that we talked about, the NPV formula. And then you can plot those present worth values against the various interest rates you might see. Where the descending line crosses $0, that's a 0 present worth, or that's the interest rate. That's the actual return, rate of return for this project. You can see it's somewhere between 10% and 11%. Of course, Excel being Excel actually has a formula you can use for this. IRR B2 to B12, and see there's our cash flow, okay? And the IRR formula actually gives you what percentage is that break-even point. Here, I'll take a step back to show you. So there's the vertical line where you cross the 0. That's the IRR return. That's what Excel tells you. So I've taken you a long way around, but you needed to understand this whole idea of stepped cash flows over years to kind of picture what's going on. This helps you understand, have I got all my expenses included? Are they all there? Are they in the proper year? And 10.55 is the rate of return on this particular calculation. Now, there are some special considerations here. First of all, if you've got a really complex cash flow, you might actually end up with more than one answer to the IRR equation. You know, you've all seen formulas where you got two equations and 2 unknowns, and there's 2 roots, there's 2 answers. That can happen if you have an extremely complex cash flow here. If the annual amounts are set to gain interest at different rates than the final interest rate, then you need some more steps to properly compare the project's interest rate to the minimum acceptable rate of return. And if you have multiple mutually exclusive alternatives, you know, we can do A, or we can do B, or we can do C, then frequently you need to do an incremental analysis. You know, that would be, so how do they compare year one? How do they compare year two? How do they compare year three? This is especially important if sensitivity analysis needs to be done. And your estimates of the money you're going to get back from your various investments are not true, because some of these investments might have a greater impact on your return than others. And you need to understand that if you're going to look at mutually exclusive alternatives. So this rate of return analysis comes from a text by L.T. Blank and Tarquin. In chapter 7, they have rate of return analysis on one project, and that's where we got this from. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to basically just open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I do. This is a Ashok Gala. I was listening to the entire conversation, and I'm at a point where I need to make a decision whether I should go ahead and start collecting my Social Security when I'm eligible at 66 and a half, or wait till I'm 68.
Okay. So I've been through that just a couple of years ago. And I can't tell you what is best.
Is that,
what's that?
Yeah, I also want to know what variables should I be considering. You know I cannot guarantee at what age I'm going to live.
Yeah. But
I can tell you that all my siblings that are still living, they are in the mid 70s to low 80s.
Okay. That's a good stab. Okay. Yeah.
And I don't need the money. But at the same time, I want to know, should I wait or should I go ahead and get it?
Okay. Well, there's a couple philosophic thoughts here. Okay.
Okay.
You notice how that chart was all based on numbers out in the future and a fixed number of years. Okay. And that's one of the challenges we have with our lives. We don't know how long we're going to live. Right.
Exactly.
So, but what you can do is you can set up a couple of scenarios. Each timeline would be a scenario. And you can say, what happens if I live to, 5 more years? What happens if I live to the average age of my, current siblings? What happens if I live to the age that my parents were, right? And my parents both passed away in their 90s. My father was 97. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to live a long time. And depending on how long you think you're going to live, you want to bracket that, and you want to plug in the values. How much would I get? And the Social Security Administration has a calculator, which will tell you, if you take it at this time, this is how much you'll get every month. Okay. And then you can lay that out for how many months you think you're going to live, right? And then you try it again. You say, well, if I wait another 3 years, then they tell me I'm going to get more. Okay. So you plan that out, but you assume the same life. Okay. So that's one set of sensitivity analyses. Another one would be, well, what if you lived shorter or longer? And what would the difference be? You can look at that and you say, what would the difference be if I delayed or did it right away? I can tell you that for me, the differences were negligible waiting until I'm 70. I'm 68. Okay. But to wait till I'm 70, okay, it really, there was almost no difference. So I'm like, huh. Sometimes when you do these types of analyses, you're going to run into situations where it's not a financial choice. It's a philosophic choice. It's one of, well, does this make sense to me? What are the intangibles? Here's a Social Security intangible. Okay. If you're working and you're not taking Social Security and you start taking it, what does it mean to you to not have to work as hard for the same income? So that becomes an intangible, doesn't it? Did I answer your question?
Yes, kind of. Yeah, it's like you said, it's so small difference between what I can get now. I'm talking about maybe $2,500 a year if I take it at 66 and a half versus 68.
Yeah.
So my thinking is I don't need the money, but I can go ahead and take the money now, invest it,
Yeah.
and maybe come out ahead. But is that Social Security amount that I'm going to get, say $40,000 a year, is that going to be taxable with my? Will I go into a different tax bracket?
Well, I don't know. You probably want to talk to a tax advisor on that. But one thing that I know about tax brackets is that if you're in a tax bracket, say, let's pick a number, 15%, and then you make a little bit more money, like it just above, and you move into a 17% or maybe an 18% tax bracket. So that 3% additional only applies to the amount you earn over the amount of money that you earn over that lower tax bracket number. It does not apply all the way down to $1.
Yeah, very good point. That makes sense. So that kind of helps me make a decision that, okay, I'm willing to go ahead and capture it when I get 66 and a half.
Yeah. And, there's a, my opinion for me was waiting made no sense. Okay. But everybody's got a different situation. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah. Ashok, you said
Thank
something
you.
crazy. You said taxes and it made sense, all in the same language. It didn't make sense. Same sentence.
Yeah, I know. We all hate paying taxes.
Yep. Yeah.
But you know what? We like driving on roads that aren't falling apart. So there's that.
Well, to make money, you got to spend money, right? So you got to help Uncle Sam out.
Yeah. I saw a YouTube guy, Peter Zehan, talking about global economics, and he made the point that the reason we get so much junk from overseas, the reason we get cheap, inexpensive stuff from other countries is because it's cheap to ship them. And the reason it's cheap to ship them is the US Navy. If it wasn't for the US Navy, there would be pirates everywhere. The US Navy made it safe for shipping, for global shipping. Mr. Zehan's point is, if the US becomes self-reliant again, which it seems to be tending that way, are we going to want to support a Navy? Will we want our Navy to make sure that China can ship stuff to us? or not? Kind of an odd question, isn't it? Okay. That's the world of politics. We don't need to go into that.
I'm going to
Any
stop
other-
recording, but we can still consider to continue the conversation. Okay.
Certainly.
Very good. Thank you all for joining us for this talk. And thank you, Doug, for all the great comments. And we'll continue on after the end of this recording.